The new Buddy and Bea chapter book series is about two second graders with very different personalities and their humorous attempts at getting along with each other. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, we'll sample the book, and I'll talk with the author about the inspiration behind it. I requested and was provided with a copy of the books, but this video is not sponsored. Jan Carr is the author of more than 50 books, including picture books and books in popular series. She joins us to talk about the first two books in her Buddy and Bea series, Not Really Buddies and Tiny Tornadoes. Jan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dan. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, tell us about this Buddy and Bea series and what inspired it.
Well, this series, they're chapter books, and it's a brand new chapter book series. People may not be aware of it. The first two books just came out in the summer, book one and book two. And chapter book series are for kids who are beginning to read. So Buddy and Bea is about two kids, Buddy and Bea, obviously, and they're second graders. They're in the same second grade class, and they have completely oil and water personalities. I like to say they're the Felix and Oscar of the elementary school set. So they're in the classroom. They have to get along. Buddy is a cautious kid. He thinks a long time before he does anything. Bea is the complete opposite. She's just spontaneous. She's completely unfiltered. She's just out there. So, I think that classrooms are a microcosm of the world itself. We all have to get along. And these two, when you put them together, there's a lot of conflict, which is always good for a story, but there's also a lot of humor and comedy.
So would you say that is the theme of this series, getting along and learning how to deal with different kinds of personalities?
Yes, definitely. And it was inspired, the whole series was really inspired by my background in education. I have degrees in child development and early childhood education, and I was a Head Start teacher, and I also volunteered extensively in my son's elementary school class here in New York City. Not in his class, but in his school, in the classroom, because I love education so much. And one thing I noticed about education, about classrooms, is that you have, whatever the class size is, you have like all these kids in one class, a very contained space. And sometimes there's a little bit of friction with the personalities. So, I loved that. And when I was a teacher, I always kept writer's notebooks. And I wrote down all of the very funny things that kids said and did. And a lot of those things are making their way into the books. Listeners can't necessarily see this picture, but this is a picture of the interior art by Chris Mackay, and it shows a very, very fun cartoony picture of Buddy stuck, this spoiler alert, this is book one, stuck between two urinals. And a person might think, well, what in the world? That's really far-fetched. What kid would get stuck between two urinals? But when I was volunteering at my son's elementary school, there was indeed a boy who got stuck between two urinals. So I had to put that in because that's just too funny.
Well, let's talk about the first two books in the Buddy and Bea series, Not Really Buddies and Tiny Tornadoes. Right. What are the stories that readers will find in these books?
Yeah, well, Not Really Buddies is the first book, and it takes place on the very first day of second grade. Buddy is really glad to be in school. He's thinking it's going to be a good year, and then a new girl shows up, and that's Bea. I have a really funny picture here that listeners won't be able to see, but it's Bea showing up on the very first day of school. Buddy and the teacher, Miss Maple, look a little surprised because Bea is bursting through the door in all her exuberant Bea-ness, and she's very loud and very fun. So the first book is really But Bea mistakes Buddy for her buddy because his name is Buddy. She gloms onto him. He can't really get away from her, and it's the beginning of the friction between them. The second book, Tiny Tornadoes, takes place. It's a school-based book, so the books are all take place in the classroom, and the second book. They're trying to figure out a name for the classroom to compete with another second grade that also has a name. But the books also have a lot of content in because I was a teacher, I try to sneak some educational content in. So the kids are also sorting books in the book basket, and there's a lot of discussion about what categories books belong in, and do poems have to rhyme, all kinds of things like that.
So, these are the first two books, and more are on the way. Why do you think these characters and stories will appeal to young readers?
Well, chapter books are for kids who are beginning to read themselves independently. And I think chapter books often have humor. Like, it's a hallmark of chapter books. And they're also often in series because kids read one and then they want to read the next one. So I think that kids will enjoy, I hope kids will enjoy the characters as much as I do and find them really funny. But also I hope that there's an emotional honesty in the stories about how kids really do find the challenges of getting along with each other. And Buddy and Bea don't always do the right, kind of most mature thing. They're very human kids, and they're second graders. And sometimes the way they try to get along makes it worse. Sometimes, and so I hope kids recognize themselves in the honest ways that it's portrayed, the difficulties and challenges of getting along with other people who might have conflicting personalities.
I'm talking with Jan Carr about her new series of chapter books, Buddy and Bea. Jan, can you read a portion of one of the books for us to give us a taste of this new series?
Well, I think I'll read from the first book, chapter 6, and it's the very first day of school, and Buddy, it takes place in the lunchroom, and Buddy has arrived in the lunchroom. He's late, very Buddy to be pokey and late, and so there's no seats next to his friends, so he ends up having to sit next to Bea and some of the girls that she's bonding with. She's a new kid, so it's her first day in the school completely. So let me see. Buddy looked around. The only empty seat he saw was next to Bea. She was sitting with Amber and Priya. Should he sit with them? He didn't really have a choice. The girls were talking. Maybe Bea would keep talking to them, not him. As Buddy sat down, some big kids walked by, really big. To Buddy, they seemed as tall as trees. Fifth graders, he figured, had to be. Cool fifth graders. Buddy twisted around so he could see them better. He leaned so far that he fell off the bench. And here's a really funny Chris Mackay piece of art, Buddy falling off the bench. Lots of movement, lots of humor. The fifth graders laughed. One of them bent down and ruffled Buddy's hair. He helped Buddy back onto the bench. Then he was gone. He messed up your hair, said Bea. I don't mind, said Buddy. He really didn't. Those big kids knew stuff, like about gravity. Buddy wanted to know stuff too. But your hair has that sticky up part in the back, said Bea, and he made it worse. You mean my cowlick, said Buddy. Your what? My cowlick, the part that won't lie flat. It swirls around like a cow licked it. Bea spat on her hand and rubbed it into his hair before Buddy could stop her. Hey, said Buddy, what are you doing? I'm trying to pat it down. No, he said, you spit in my hair. I didn't. I spit in my hand. But then you put it in my hair. Bea spit into her hand again. Buddy tried to block Bea. Actually, he tried to hit her. Just her hand, which wasn't really hitting, was it? But Bea was fast. She'd already rubbed in more spit.
Well, I can definitely see why Buddy and Bea's personalities would clash. As you noted, this series is for kids who are at an age where they're starting to read for themselves and developing their reading skills, but sometimes adults will also read these books with their kids. So do you kind of keep both of those audiences in mind when you write your books?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because I'm a big proponent of parents and caregivers continuing to read with their kids after the kids are becoming independent readers. Obviously you want to respect the fact that the kids have a pride in their independent reading, but parents and kids sharing books really can go on long after kids are independent readers. And there's nothing really better than sharing love of books and continuing to do that. So if parents want to read these with their kids, they can maybe, have the kid read to them or take turns reading. But it's really an opportunity to have a conversation about what they're reading, about the challenges of getting along, which is the overarching theme of the book.
Jan, I'm always curious about how people come into their professions. You mentioned that you were an educator, but when did you decide you wanted to write for children?
Well, I guess I had always been a writer at heart, and I certainly was always a reader. I was one of those kids who always, had my nose in a book, and I was always writing. But it never occurred to me that I could be a writer, because when and where I grew up, I didn't know anyone who was a writer, and at that time. And so then I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. And after college, I moved to New York, and I started to kind of get an inkling. I was a teacher here, and I started to get an inkling. Oh, maybe I could actually do this for a career. And so eventually, I found my way to working at Children's Television Workshop, the now called Sesame Workshop, and then at Scholastic.
What is it about writing for children that you enjoy?
Well, I kind of I like the young age group, and I enjoy. I always enjoyed being in the classroom with young children because they say such funny things, and they have their own logic, which is often quite different from adult logic. And one of the funny things I try to do in the books is sometimes the kids are talking, and they're talking to the adults, and the adults don't really understand what the kids are saying, and the kids don't really understand what the adults are saying, because the truth is we have very different logic systems. And so I find that kind of hilarious. And I just love being around young children. It's so fresh and refreshing.
You touched on this a little bit earlier, but tell us a bit more about the illustrations in your book and the illustrator that you work with.
Yeah, well, the illustrator is Chris Mackay, and she's a cartoonist, an actual cartoonist who works on cartoons that kids can stream or watch on TV or whatever. And I'm holding up a picture that she does that shows exactly the kind of cartoon elements that she works into the interior illustration, which are really so much fun, I think, for young readers. She gets here. This is Buddy falling off the bench in the lunchroom from the passage that I just read, and you can see there's so much movement and so much humor. But she also really gets the characters. I'm holding up an example of the relationship of Buddy and Bea in the book. I had trouble picking examples of this because there are so many in the books. All of the illustrations, really, someone would just, if you showed the illustrations to someone, here's another one, you just get their relationship. There's always some contention going on, always some movement. There always seems to be a conflict over something. Here, they're arguing over who gets to hand the note to the principal when they had to deliver a note to the principal. So she's just Chris is really great. She's her cartoon elements really enhance the art.
We've been talking about the first 2 books in the Buddy and Bea chapter book series, Not Really Buddies and Tiny Tornadoes. Jan, thank you very much for talking with me today.
Thank you, Dan. It's a great pleasure.
Now, if you'd like to purchase these Buddy and Bea chapter books, I've placed links for you in the description below. Thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. And if you'd like to see more videos about children's books and their authors, be sure to like, subscribe, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.